Welcome to the Big Fellas Podcast, where we chop it up about all things past, present, and future about the game of basketball. Where facts, stats, and context reign supreme.
That is blasphemous!
Sometimes it gets crazy, but we always keep it real. Get ready to learn from players, coaches, and fans from all levels of the game and see the court in a brand new way. And now, fresh off the sidelines, here's your host, John Hartofilis.
What it do, fellas, and welcome to the Big Fellas Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, JH, coming to you from New York City, the mecca of basketball. Today, I'm joined by professional NBA performance coach Alan Stein. Alan is a world-renowned coach, speaker, and author that has worked with future NBA Hall of Famers such as LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Chris Paul, and many others. We've got a good one in store for you today, fellas. Episode number 10, Alan Stein, NBA Performance Guru. What's going on, Alan?
Not much. How are you?
Great. I'm really excited to have you on. So I coach the freshman basketball team at Xavier High School, and I know my guys are going to love this episode because I have to admit a lot of times in the pregame locker room, but in practice, I'm doing my best Alan Stein impression, constantly reminding them to play present, never be bored with the basics. And a lot of the things that you say all the time, I repeat to them all the time. And,
awesome.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this.
That's super cool. And I appreciate you paying it forward and sharing these different messages. So we'll have a fun conversation today for sure.
Definitely. So just to start off, could you tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to during this quarantine, some of the organizations you've been a part of, just kind of how that's played out for you?
Sure. I guess the Cliff Notes version would be that basketball has always been my number one passion. And I fell in love with the game at a very early age. And I'm very thankful that 4 decades later, basketball is still a major pillar in my life. And, you know, to having been able to make a life and a living and have some incredible experiences and friendships through something I'm passionate about is something I'm very, very grateful for. At present, I'm a keynote speaker and author. But my previous career was as a basketball performance coach and had an opportunity to work with some really elite level middle school and high school age players, and then eventually get some contract work with some groups like Nike and Jordan Brand and USA Basketball, and was able to observe and work alongside some of the best players in the world. And I've really taken everything that I've learned in all of those different experiences and created a philosophy which I use now to help folks in any area of their life, whether it's business, interpersonal and relationship wise, or still doing some stuff in the sports world. So my goal is to fill other people's buckets and to give them some strategies and practical and applicable things that they can use to raise their performance, but then more importantly, raise the performance of those around them.
No, that's awesome. And on that note of just kind of raising people's performance, you've already released the book, Raise Your Game. And I saw that you just announced Sustain Your Game coming out soon. So if you want to just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the goal for Raise Your Game was simply to give folks some practical tips and strategies on how they could elevate their own performance. And the follow-up book, Sustain Your Game, which is probably about a year away from release, I still have to finish writing it, but thankfully got a deal in place, is how once you've raised your performance to a certain level, how can you sustain that high performance without getting burnt out? We're going to take a look at, what do you do to manage stress, to alleviate stagnation, and then, as I just said, beat burnout. It's really hard to stay motivated and stay inspired and stay at the top of your game for long periods of time. But I've always been really fascinated by people that in any industry, not even just sports or business, but in any industry, that have been able to do that.
Definitely. Kind of, I mentioned at the beginning, my favorite little tidbit of yours is play where your feet are, or play present. I like to say play where your feet are, just because with freshmen, they kind of can visualize that a little bit better. Tell us a little bit more about that, how you came up with that, and how you preach it.
Well, I wasn't the one that invented the be where your feet are. I actually heard it from 2 different sources around the same time. One of them was Oprah Winfrey, and the other was Nick Saban, the head coach of Alabama football. And both of them are incredibly successful in their respective endeavors. So I figured if both of them were talking about a concept, it probably had some validity to it. But there was just something about the terminology of being where your feet are that really resonated with me. I mean, I've been long talking about playing present, for well over a decade, but there was something about the way that specific set of words, it just really hit home with me. And I do use that as kind of the short definition of playing present. And really being where your feet are just means to make sure your mind and your heart and your physical body are all in the same place so that you can be fully present and be fully attentive to the person you're with or the task at hand. And that's ultimately what's most important. We tend to live in a day and age now where people are physically present for something, but they're not mentally or emotionally present. You know, you might be having lunch with someone, but you're looking at your phone. Or you might be with your children, but you're thinking about a work proposal that you have to get finished. And certainly as it pertains to sport, you know, when you have basketball players in the game, you want them focused on that possession right there, on what's immediately in front of them and what they need to do to be at their best. You don't want them thinking about the past. You don't want them thinking about the future. And you definitely don't want them in that moment thinking about anything that's non-basketball related.
Definitely. And it's interesting when you bring up how it's not just a basketball thing, it's also an everyday life thing. And whether you're at lunch with someone on your phone, you're really not being present. And a big thing I've heard you talk a lot about is meditation and how that's played a big role in your life. So what does that look like for you in terms of meditation?
Well, I'm a huge fan of any type of mindfulness practice. And I look at mindfulness in a few different ways. One, I believe mindfulness is simply being aware. It's aware both of your internal and your external. It's being aware of your feelings and your emotions, but it's being aware of your surroundings. It's being aware of the emotions and feelings of those that you're with or those that you're coaching or playing with. It's also about connecting heart, soul, and body all into one so that we can make sure the entire body and mind and everything is working in unison together. So I do believe that everyone needs to have some type of mindfulness practice that allows them to be grounded, allows them to be aware, and allows them to simply be present. One of the most effective mindfulness practices that I found is meditation. And I follow a guided meditation using the Headspace app. It takes about 10 minutes. I do it. It's the second thing I do every single morning right after I make my bed. And I find that doing that, making that a priority and making that 10-minute investment at the beginning of my day allows me to start my day from a place of being grounded, centered and aware, and certainly mindful. And that's how I want to start every single day. It puts me in the right frame of mind for whatever it is that I'm going to do. And then what's also important to know is that, you know, it's not just this one 10-minute thing that I do. I check in with myself periodically throughout the day. You know, there's plenty of times where I'll just take a moment and stop and take a deep breath and try to get myself back to center so that I can approach everything that I'm doing in a much more mindful manner. And because of this little practice that I do it consistently enough that it's starting to pay dividends and make a big difference. And, you know, it's very rare these days that anything can happen that gets me rattled or flustered or frustrated. I'm much more in control of my emotional palate, which certainly has helped me improve my performance.
Definitely. That's a great way to put it in terms of how to improve your performances. Never get too high, never get too low, always stay consistent. And something I've heard you talk a lot about actually is how obviously everyone talks about working hard. A lot of people also sometimes bring up working smart, but working consistently is also a big thing. So kind of those big three, I've seen, I remember there's a big video of you doing it in your Words of Wisdom playlist about guys that maybe work hard, but they don't do the other two things. And what does that kind of mean to you about doing one, but not the other two?
Yeah, you actually have to have all three. I mean, you need to have a certain level of effort, and that's the working hard part. And I define working hard as intentionally leaving your comfort zone with purpose. It's not just trying to get a sweat or get in a workout. It's making sure you're doing so with intention and purpose, with a goal in mind. But yes, you absolutely have to have a certain level of effort in order to perform well in anything. But you also need to work smart. You know, it's incredibly important that you're working on the right things in the right way, you know, and all of these things have such high utility that they apply to any area of life. But if we're looking at the narrow part of basketball, I mean, you could have a player working on the wrong drills or the wrong skills or doing them in the wrong way. And even if they're doing them to the best of their ability, they're not going to see very much improvement. So we have to make sure we work smart. And then the third piece, which is what's missing from a lot of people, as you just said so perfectly, is the consistency part. You need to work hard and you need to work smart, but you have to do those things consistently. You can't just do them when you feel like it. You can't just do them when it's convenient. You can't just do them when you want to. You have to work hard and you have to work smart consistently if you want to see your performance maximized.
Awesome. And just obviously off that point, a lot of these kind of words to life that you have, I saw on LinkedIn, you have that words to life bracket. And self-awareness won out of 16 great words. And I'm just kind of curious as to what self-awareness means to you and why that kind of won out.
Well, self-awareness, I believe, has to be the starting point for everyone. And I know this cliche is overused. This analogy is overused, but it's very similar to using a GPS on your phone to get somewhere. I mean, it's one thing to know the destination, but before even the destination, you have to know where you are at present. A GPS can't work without those two different points. It has to know where you are, and it has to know where you're going. If you live in LA and I live in DC and someone asks both of us for directions to Chicago, we're going to both give them very different directions based on where we're starting from. So where we're starting from has to be the foundation to everything else. And I believe self-awareness, both as a player, but just as a human being, is the most important trait that we can work hard to develop. And it is something that takes time to develop. We'll have different levels of awareness at any point in time in our life, but the goal is to slowly and incrementally increase so that we're becoming more and more aware of ourselves every single day. When I look at self-awareness, there's a few things that really stick out. One, certainly you have to know the things that you do well, your natural talents, your strengths, your goals, your dreams, the things you like. Most people are pretty in tune with that stuff. But you also have to have the courage to look on the other side of the curtain. You have to have the courage and the vulnerability and the humility to be able to look at the things that you don't do so well, some weaknesses or opportunities for growth, or fears and insecurities. What are the things that keep you up at night? And it does take some courage to be able to stare those things in the eye. But in order to be truly self-aware, you have to know both sides, because all of that stuff combined is what makes you, you. So we have to be willing to look at both sides. Equally important, we need to make sure that the way we view ourselves is congruent with the way that the rest of the world views us. So we need to make sure that how we evaluate ourselves is what other people see. So a perfect example would be if I asked you, John, if you were a good listener, and you said, yes, I'm a great listener, but I asked the 5 people that know you the best, and they all said, oh no, John is an awful listener. It's like talking to a rock. Well, that would simply mean that you don't have very high self-awareness. You think you're a great listener. The rest of the world disagrees. As comical as it may sound, if I asked you if you were a good listener and you said, Alan, to be honest, it's an area that I really need to improve. I've got an opportunity for growth and I want to really improve my ability to listen because at present, I'm not great with it. And then I asked the 5 people who know you the best and they said, yeah, John's not a very good listener. He's like talking to a rock. That would actually mean you have very high self-awareness. You would be aware of the fact that that is an area that you need to improve. And there's nothing wrong with that. But being aware of the fact that that's an opportunity for growth is ultimately what's most important. And when you have this type of awareness, it blends perfectly into having the emotional intelligence to be able to identify your feelings and emotions. So really the last step of being self-aware is identifying how you're feeling in the moment. So, right now I'm really frustrated. I'm a coach and the team is not playing well. So I'm really frustrated. But then having really heightened self-awareness, you'll take it a step further and say, okay, well, why am I really frustrated? It's probably not because this group of freshmen aren't playing well. There's got to be a deeper reason. Do I feel that they're not following directions? Do I feel that they're not playing hard because they don't trust me or believe in me? Do I feel that they're disrespecting me because they don't buy into the culture? Like, what is it that's really making me frustrated? And then the last level of that is being able to say, it's okay that I feel frustration. There's nothing wrong with that. But what is the way that I can use this to move forward and actually improve the situation? If I'm frustrated that the team is not playing well, what is the best way that I can speak to the team or communicate that with the team that will increase their performance, not decrease it? So, maybe if I say to myself, well, at the next practice, I'm going to scream at them and curse at them and I'm going to run them until their legs fall off. Well, that might not be the best response in order to get what you want, which is for them to play better. So maybe you say, okay, I don't want to do that. And this is all about awareness. It's having the awareness to go, okay, things aren't working out the way that I would like them to. I want to choose a response that's going to increase the likelihood that things do get better. And that is the ultimate sense of self-awareness.
Awesome. No, that's a great way to put it. And in an effort to kind of make myself a better listener, I have to ask you kind of the difference between, I've heard you say this a lot, hearing and listening. When a player hears you and they're nodding their head and they're looking at you in your eyes and you think they're listening, but they really aren't.
Well, the big difference between hearing and listening is hearing is involuntary. I just clapped my hands. You and every one of your listeners heard that. I mean, you have no choice but to hear it. But listening to someone and actually trying to learn or connect or process what they're saying is a choice. So you could be sitting in the back of the classroom, doodling on a piece of paper or thumbing through Instagram, and you're kind of hearing what the teacher's saying, but you're not truly actively listening. You're not trying to connect with them or to learn from them. So there is a huge difference between hearing and listening. And one of the best tools is eye contact. You have a greater chance of listening and actually recalling what the speaker is saying if you make eye contact. So what I would always tell, I would tell this to players, but I say this to my own children now, is you need to listen with your eyes. We hear with our ears, but we listen with our eyes. And especially in the confines of a basketball practice, you're in this big cavernous gym, you got 15 players, there's ball bouncing, there's whistles blowing, there's all sorts of stuff going on. And when the coach is going to speak, players need to lock in their feet, lock in their hips, lock in their shoulders, lock in their head, and lock in their eyes. There needs to be no other movement, no distractions. They can't be, fiddling with their hair or retying their shoe or kind of bouncing the ball. They need to lock everything in and focus and give, in this case, the coach, a full sign of respect, which is listening with your eyes. And active listening, just like shooting a free throw, is a skill. And the only way you get better at any skill is with purposeful practice. So I recommend everyone get in your reps of active listening. And the beautiful part is there's no shortage of opportunities to listen, because most people like to talk. So I'm sure, in your inner circle and people in your neighborhood and in your family, there's plenty of opportunities for you to lock in and practice listening. And same thing is true even with this podcast we're recording right now. I'm not saying that someone needs to be sitting in a dark room with their eyes closed listening. I mean, it's okay if they're listening to this in the car. It's okay if they're listening to this, when they're working out or on a run, but they need to make sure they are actively listening and processing everything that you and I are saying if they really want it to sink in and add value to their lives.
Definitely. And things like listening, purposeful practice are things that the all-time greats do. And you obviously worked with a lot of them. It'd be taxing. I'd probably spend an hour in this episode listing them out. But kind of what do all these players have in common that you see, okay, the reason they've made it all to this level is because they all do this. What is that for you?
There's actually a few things. One of them you mentioned at the very beginning of the episode is one of the things that you remind your players all the time. And I'm so thankful that you do that. That is the elite never get bored with the basics. They have a very strong respect for the fundamentals. They understand that the fundamentals are the foundation to which the rest of the house is built. Of course, when we're talking about basketball, those fundamentals are footwork, shooting mechanics, your ability to handle the ball and defend and rebound and so forth. But what I usually tell folks in any area, in any industry, is figure out what are the basics of what it is that you're trying to improve. If you're trying to improve your bottom line as a business, what are the basics that you need to master in order to do that? If you're trying to improve your marriage with your spouse, well, what are the basics that you need to do to improve that? And then focus on relentlessly working to improve those basics, especially during the unseen hours. This does not mean that you don't graduate to more advanced drills or skills or other methods. It just means that you focus on mastery of the basics first. Ultimately, that is the key to high performance. It's not doing what's new and what's shiny and what's sexy. It's getting a firm command of the basics. That's one. Another thing that I've learned from high performers is they're always trying to learn more. They're always open to being coached. They're open to people that can share things with them that will allow them to continue to raise their game. And in order to be open and coachable and to learn new things, they have to have humility. So they're humble enough to admit that no matter how good they are, they can still get better. And they blend that nicely with confidence. I mean, the best basketball players I've worked with, I mean, you can see some of them on the wall behind me. I mean, they have very high confidence in their game. They believe they are the best player on the court. And that's great. I want them to have that confidence. But just because they're the best player on the court doesn't mean that they can't still themselves improve a little bit or get a little bit better. And they're always very open to that. So if you kind of take, in summary, a lot of the things we've been talking about so far, if you're willing to decide what the fundamentals are and focus on those basics, if you're always open to proper coaching, if you're very intentional about giving a great work ethic and working smart and being consistent, if you learn how to become a world-class active listener, like just doing those handful of things every single day will give you the potential to being the best that you're capable of.
Definitely. And obviously it's important to never get bored with the basics. And the first step to doing that is to actually do it, right? You normally, a lot of when you're speaking, you don't really have too many tricks, but the one trick that I've seen you do that I really like is the Who Wants $5? And if you want to tell us a little bit about that, I think it's obviously funny to listen to, but honestly, it's a shock to everyone in the room because everyone's thinking to themselves, wow, it's that simple. So
yeah, it's funny. I haven't done that in a long, long time. That's a good reminder. I might need to break that one back out. But ultimately, what you're talking about is connecting the knowing and the doing, and that's at the heart of what I believe. That's what's called a performance gap. A performance gap is the gap between what you know and what you do. It is literally the gap between what you know you should do and what you actually do. And ultimately, especially as a coach, I mean, your number one goal is to get your players to close their performance gaps. Yes, you'll always be teaching them new stuff. Being a coach, especially at the freshman level, is part teaching. But there's so many things that your players already know. I've never met your team, but I promise you, if I asked each of your players right now to write down a list of the healthiest foods they know of, they could do that pretty easily. And I bet you they'd write down a lot of the same foods. If I asked your players, how many hours of sleep are you supposed to get every night? They'd all shout out an answer in a split second. And I'm willing to bet most of them would shout out the same answer. And if I ask them, hey, what should you guys be doing from a physical fitness standpoint, like from a working out standpoint, whether it's basketball specific drills or whether it's strength and conditioning and fitness, can you just kind of etch out what a week should look like over the summer? They could do that. Now, they might not be able to do it to the level you can or to the level of an NBA strength coach, but they pretty much know what they should be doing. But then if I turned it around and asked your same players and said, well, how many of you are eating these foods every single day? How many of you got that sleep last night? How many of you are doing these workouts and have been doing them consistently during this global pandemic? What we'd see is a lot of performance gaps arise. We'd see players that go, well, I know I'm supposed to eat a healthy breakfast, and I know I'm supposed to get good sleep, and I know I'm supposed to do this to improve my offhand or my shooting, but they're not doing it. So as coaches, we want to get players to start doing the things that they know they're supposed to do. And once we've closed that gap to a razor thin edge, then we can start stacking on new stuff. And it's the same thing for anyone. There are people right now that are listening to this podcast, and I can promise you, I haven't said anything yet that they don't already know, that things they haven't heard before. These are things that people have heard and they know intuitively and intellectually. But what I ask everyone listening right now is, don't worry about whether you know this. Ask yourself one of the most important questions you can ask yourself, and that is, how well am I doing this? Are you an active listener? Are you working hard, smart, and consistently? Are you taking steps to create a mindfulness practice so you can become more aware? And once again, if someone is being truly honest with themselves and allow themselves to be humbled and vulnerable, the answer is no, they're not doing all of these things, at least as consistently as they're capable of. And that really is all of our job, is to get the people that we want to help to do the things they know they're supposed to do.
How do you go about doing that and closing that performance gap? What do you think is the best kind of way? Well, obviously everyone's different, but that you see is, okay, every time that it's a glaring gap, it's a huge gap, this is what I always do to shrink it down a little bit.
Well, the first thing, as we've talked about, is awareness, because you can't improve something if you're unaware of it. So we'll keep using the listening as an example, just because I think it's one that everyone can reference. If you don't know that you're a poor listener, then you're certainly not going to improve it. So first and foremost, you have to have some awareness of it. And really, you also need to dig a little deeper and have an understanding of how that's actually impacting you. What is the impact that being a poor listener is having? Well, I can tell you from experience, because there have been times in my life where I've been a really poor listener. I mean, it will adversely affect all of the relationships in your life. So if you want to have thriving relationships, with a significant other, with your children, with your students, with your players, with your coach, with your teammates, with your coworkers and colleagues. If you want to have a great relationship with all of those different folks, then you need to become a better listener. So you have to have an understanding. Well, what's at risk if I don't improve my listening? Well, I'm not going to have a fulfilling marriage, or I'm not going to have a connection with my children, or my players aren't going to play very hard for me, or the kids in my class aren't going to learn as much from me because of this issue that I'm having. And then once you have that, now you can feel compelled enough to make the change. And there's a 3-step process that works really, really well for anyone that's looking to close a performance gap. The very first thing is you need to pick one habit or one behavioral change that you're going to make. And that may sound really easy to do, but it's actually challenging to only pick one, because most people want to pick a variety of different things. If we flip this around and say, let's change the example. Let's say somebody knows that they're supposed to eat healthy foods, they know they're supposed to get sleep, and they know they're supposed to work out. So they want to become more physically fit. Well, I want them to just identify the most important of those habits to look at now. So what do you want to attack first? Maybe your goal is to go for a 30-minute walk every morning. Or maybe your goal is to cut out sugar, whatever it may be, but I just want you to pick one. And the best way to do that is literally write down 3 or 4 things that you want to start doing to improve your performance in this one area. And then write 3 or 4 things that you need to stop doing because it's sabotaging your performance. And you have this list of, 6 to 8 things. And then I only want you to circle the one that you're going to start with, the one that you believe would be the most impactful. So let's just say someone listening to this wants to become more physically fit. They've been very sedentary. And they say every single morning, I'm going to go for a 30-minute walk. And of course, anyone listening, maybe a 30-minute jog is more appropriate. Maybe you say, I'm going to start every morning with 100 push-ups, whatever it may be, but you pick the one thing you're going to do. Then step 2 is that you make a commitment to yourself that you're going to do this for 66 straight days. There's been some research that shows that after doing something daily for 66 days, it doesn't automatically change your life, but you start to lower the friction of doing this thing. It just starts to become more of what you do, becomes a little bit easier, just becomes part of your routine. So 66 days, I like it because it's a rather unique and arbitrary number, so it's easy to remember. It's just a hair over 2 months, which means it's not, it shouldn't be too intimidating. If I told you that in order to change a habit, you had to do everything every day for the next 6 years, that would intimidate most people and they wouldn't even start. However, if I said, hey, if you do this thing a couple times in the next 6 days, it'll change you, you'll probably agree, well, that just sounds too good to be true. So now it's not even believable. So I think 66 days falls in that sweet spot of, if I could do something every day for the next 66 days, I think it will start to become sticky. And then the third step, and one of the most important steps in improving anything, is you want to keep the spotlight of accountability on. So in this case, you would want, you say you're going to go for a walk every morning. You make a commitment that you're going to go for a 30-minute walk, no matter what's going on in your life for the next 66 days. You may even choose to buy a calendar and a red Sharpie and say, every day that I go for a walk, I'm going to put a big red X on the calendar, and I'm not stopping till I get 66 red X's in a row. And then the third step is you recruit your inner circle and recruit people that you know truly care about you and want to see you successful. And you tell them, I need you to help hold me accountable. I'm going to try and go for a walk every day for the next 66 days. I know that that's going to be very challenging to do, and I need you to check in with me. I need you to send me a text every day at lunch and ask if I went for a walk. I need you to give me a call and recommend some audiobooks that I can listen to on my walk. I need you to keep the spotlight of accountability on me. So not only am I committed to doing this, I'm also giving you my word that I'm going to give this my best effort. And I don't want to disappoint somebody in my inner circle who's trying to help me. And if you can focus on one thing, you can do it for 66 straight days, and you can get the people that love you and care about you and challenge you and support you to hold you accountable. You have a very good chance statistically of making that one change. And then the beautiful part is at the end of that 66 days, you don't stop. You're going to keep going for your walk. This is just now a part of what you do. And then you can slowly start to integrate something else in. So now you say, okay, now walking is part of my daily routine. Now I'm going to limit sugar. I'm not going to eat any sugary foods for the next 66 days. And now you start to do that. And then 66 days later, you say, I'm actually going to start doing some lunges and some push-ups after my walk. And you start stacking these things on top of each other. And as you can see, if every 2 to 3 months, you're either adding a positive habit or removing a negative one, you'll start to see some major changes in your life. And, by using this example, if at the end of one calendar year, you go for a 30-minute walk and you follow that with some lunges and push-ups, and you stop eating sugar, and you stop eating processed foods, and you start getting 8 hours of sleep, and you start stacking these things together, the amount of growth you'd make in 1 year would be almost unrecognizable. And it's very, you're able to do that if you take this strategic approach. What most people do is they wait for January 1st to roll around. They wake up that morning and say, I'm going to do all of these things at once. And then 2 weeks into the new year, they've basically quit every single one of those things, and they end up getting no result.
That's a great breakdown on how to build proper habits and how to avoid overloading yourself. Just to move on really quickly, I have some quick fire questions for you. Really quickly, how do you define success?
For me, success is not completely synonymous with happiness, but there is a direct correlation. I consider success, am I doing the things that fill my bucket, and am I doing things that fill the bucket of other people? Am I happy and am I fulfilled? Which for me has a lot to do with the relationships in my life. So I don't really look at many external metrics for success. I think a lot of people tie them to monetary achievement or certain accolades. And while those things are nice and there's nothing wrong with those things being some drivers and some motivators, I get to wake up every day with people that I truly care about, doing something that I enjoy doing that I believe is of service to other people. And for me, that's how I look at success.
That's a great way to look at it. Obviously, we live in a very big win now culture, and people kind of forget. Also, really quickly, what advice would you give to a young coach trying to not just break into the industry, but just kind of expand their knowledge of the game and improve themselves?
For any young coach, I would give the following recommendations. Number one, work on your craft every single day. And your craft is going to be a wide variety of different areas. Your craft as a coach is not just the X's and O's and the strategies and the zone presses and the out of bounds plays, but it's leadership, it's communication, it's emotional intelligence. It's, figure out how you can get just a little bit better at being a coach every single day. Number two, I would say is put a high value on relationships. Do everything you can to build and forge strong relationships with everyone within your sphere of influence. So work hard to develop great relationships with your players, with the other members of your staff, with those, in your school or your organization or your community. Work hard to build relationships with mentors and people that are a little bit further down the line than you are that you can learn from. Create great relationships with people that you are a little further along than, younger coaches or newer coaches that aspire to do what you're doing, but really put a heavy focus on relationships. And in every one of those relationships, have a mindset of, it's not about me, it's about you. What can I do to add value to your life? What can I do to fill your bucket? If you work on your craft every day and you build those relationships, if you can do those two things as a young coach, you'll continue to see yourself make great progress.
Awesome. That's definitely really applicable to me, and I appreciate it. So just the last question I'm going to ask you is, how do you continue to grow when you've already achieved so much, kind of never being satisfied and always looking to improve? And what does that look like for you? What does the future look like for you? And that's how we'll wrap things up.
To me, the key to never getting satisfied is not getting attached to outcomes. Just learn to fall in love with the process. Learn to fall in love with the journey. When you do achieve certain outcomes, be thankful and happy that you did, but just actually love the day-to-day of what you do. And that's what's most important. What most people do is they think that once I achieve this thing, I'll have everything that I want. And then they achieve that thing and realize that they don't have everything that they want. And they have kind of this empty feeling. So for me, I enjoy the process of developing relationships with my children. I enjoy the process of getting better at at the craft of speaking. I enjoy the process of writing a book. So even when that book's finished, I enjoy the process so much that I can easily shift gears and say, okay, what's the next thing that I would like to focus on now? So for me, that's the key to not getting complacent, is just don't worry so much about outcomes and learn to focus on and live in the present and the process.
That's great. Passion's a huge thing of mine, and that's obviously super applicable to everything. And what you're saying about kind of how you do what you do just in every day of your life and what drives you is great. Alan, thank you so much for coming on. I loved our entire discussion. I really appreciate it. And I really hope to connect with you soon and keep up with all the great things you're doing.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Big Fellas Podcast. Check us out on all major social media platforms at Big Fellas Pod to join the chop up. You can also listen to us on every podcast platform on the planet. Stay tuned for the next episode, Big Fellas.